Hello, today we are talking about Dreamcatcher. So I'm going to go through the book and then kind of compare it to the movie. With the book, one of the things that I have as a critique is the parts where it talks about Owen and Kurtz and like goes into the military and the back information on the aliens. I find it very boring and it's kind of hard to read through it. You have to push yourself a bit. Whereas in the movie, they didn't really touch on that too much. They really tried to just get into the story, which was nice. And I can see why the movie would stay away from that and not really care to give you all of the information the book does. One thing that I do really like about the book is I love the ending and they get their happy ending, but I will say I really was disappointed with how much God comes into this at the end. And there's a part where they're speculating about how Jonesy got infected by Mr. Gray, and it's so frustrating to read it because they're like, well, you just made it up. Hello, today we are talking about Dreamcatcher. So I'm going to go through the book and then kind of compare it to the movie. With the book, one of the things that I have as a critique is the parts where it talks about Owen and Kurtz and like goes into the military and the back information on the aliens. I find it very boring and it's kind of hard to read through it. You have to push yourself a bit. Whereas in the movie, they didn't really touch on that too much. They really tried to just get into the story, which was nice. And I can see why the movie would stay away from that and not really care to give you all of the information the book does. One thing that I do really like about the book is I love the ending and they get their happy ending, but I will say I really was disappointed with how much God comes into this at the end. And there's a part where they're speculating about how Jonesy got infected by Mr. Gray, and it's so frustrating to read it because they're like, well, you just made it up. And that's their So it was really frustrating in the book to be reading their interpretation or their theory as to how Jonesy got infected and just saying, well, you basically made it up. But then there's certain elements where it's like, well, did he? So I'll get to that. But in the movie, it doesn't do that. Like, what happened really happened, and it's because Jonesy was infected in some way. It just wasn't quite the way that the other people got infected. And I appreciate that because I was so annoyed that Henry was like, well, God and you, dude. Duh, it's very obvious. It was just God and then your imagination. That was so annoying. But I do actually really like Dreamcatcher. I think it's a really good read. I enjoyed going through and picking up things that I didn't get when I first read it. I will say it is a very graphic book. Very graphic. And there are a couple parts where the men encounter damage to their manhood, which, the way with which he describes it and like paints that scene, it sounded so painful. Like I was having sympathy pain because I could not imagine. So I did enjoy how the communicate, like the telepathy was like brought out in the book. I feel like the movie kind of glossed over the telepathy thing, and it was so interesting to have it be that the telepathy is between the boys, not, and like they don't really need to be infected because the virus, it's the red fungus that helps all the other people get telepathy. There's a part where it starts to die off, and Henry and Jonesy can still have that telepathy connection. It was interesting to see how much the Dreamcatcher came into play with this, and I understand with the movie they probably couldn't capture quite how that worked out in the movie. It's very complicated, and I just think that'd be really hard to translate into a movie. I will say I did like certain aspects of the movie. I love that they changed the song, because the song in this, the Beaver Sings Duddits, is atrocious. It's so bad, and maybe it's because I can't carry a tune, and there's no tune in this, so you're like, I don't know what that is. Like, how does that sound? But in the movie, they did Blue Bayou, and I love that song. That's such a good song. So I was fine with that change. I will say I didn't love that in the movie, Jonesy already has his little filing cabinet room that he jokes like that's where he puts all of his important information, rather than it being something that Duddits makes him. I feel like it takes away some of the magic with which Duddits is, and it kind of makes it seem like Jonesy's very, very powerful. Whereas that whole little room that Jonesy was able to keep himself safe from, that's because of Duddits. So I didn't necessarily love that. And this is going to be a bit of a spoiler, so my apologies. I did kind of like that the movie changed it to where Duddits was a full-on alien, and that's why everything had to happen the way it did, because Duddits was so connected to Mr. Gray because they were both aliens. I thought that was an interesting take. I can see how maybe somebody would read this and not necessarily love that. I get it. I thought that was interesting, and I actually feel like that made a little more sense. It's still fine that the book didn't do that, but I like that the movie tried to do that to make it a little more logical in a way. I will say this is a very big book. It's not as big as it, but it is still a big book, so it's a lot to read all this. It's a very fun read though, and there is a lot of just details, and there's a lot of killing in the book. So if you're into that and you want to read a bunch of that, there's some really good killing scenes, whereas the movie didn't really have that. I will say though, Mr. Gray is so much creepier in the book. Oh my gosh. In the book, he sounds so creepy. Like the way his face kind of glitches in the book, and he can look in two places at once almost. Ugh. And some of the powers he has, it was really good in the book, whereas the movie, it falls kind of flat because all they do to differentiate Mr. Gray and Jonesy is an accent, and he kind of smiles weird. I don't know, I didn't love that. I feel like the actor did a great job at trying to convey two different characters, but I just don't think it had quite the same discomfort that the book had, and just ooh. But I really enjoyed Dreamcatcher. I think it's a really good book, and this is my theory. Obviously, there's no concrete proof to this, but I think that the Gray boys, because that's what they call the aliens, and they're all gray men, are some sort of aspect of Pennywise, because they've been coming for forever, their ships weren't made by them. Like their ships, Kurtz says in one point that it seems like they're taking material and recycling it for a spaceship, and that's what they're using. And I really think that either Pennywise has laid eggs, but because they're like, sorry, it's a complicated theory. Basically, I think because Pennywise is just one entity, he's essentially having eggs because he's an asexual creature. And by doing this, he's losing some of the power that could go into the eggs because the turtle only made one Pennywise. And I think because there isn't that much power, there's certain aspects that the virus, the red fungus, can take, but then it can only do so much. So this is going to be kind of a long-winded theory. Sorry, stay with me. So the virus is what the gray men are made of. And they come to Earth saying that they're dying, they're in need, they're not infectious, and, they're gonna be nice. But then the second that people try and make contact with the aliens, they either infect them with the virus or blow up and try to get them to inhale them like they did with Jonesy, so they can try to then take over the host. And I really think that that's because they're some sort of remnant of Pennywise. And again, like I said, I have no proof. But then some of the things that Mr. Gray can do, he turned himself into an alien because that's what Jonesy was basically looking for. He turned into, or shapeshifted into, what Jonesy wanted to see when he was in fear. That sounds a lot like Pennywise. And then certain things he can do, he was able to use telekinesis, and I don't necessarily know if Pennywise can really use telekinesis, but there's so much we don't know about him. And so I could totally see that. And they come every 20 so years. And that sounds a lot like Pennywise. And so I feel like he could be having some babies and then sending them up in parts of Derry, trying to get them to stick because he knows that he's most powerful in Derry. So if they stay in Derry, he can kind of help them and he can control them. And in this, Mr. Gray calls himself Bob Gray, and that's one of the names that Pennywise gives Georgie when he meets him in the sewer. So I think these are all Pennywise's offsprings coming to certain parts of Derry and trying to infect it and take over all of Derry. And it's fun to read it when that's how you see it, because Pennywise, he had the kids, Beverly, Stan, Bill, and all of them, they for some reason knew that he was female when they were kids. And then it comes back to them again when they go up as grown-ups and they're like, oh, Pennywise is a female and she laid a bunch of eggs. And so imagine if when they were kids, they didn't kill the eggs, so then Pennywise was able to send them. That is my theory, that the Graymen are Pennywise's babies, and that's why Mr. Gray was able to do some of the things he did and why he was so powerful. Like I said, I hate the ending, how Henry is it's just God, and you have a crazy imagination, Jonesy. You were gonna kill a bunch of people, but it was you were the one who liked to kill because he liked to watch horror movies. That's stupid. I hate that. I like to think more that Mr. Gray was really crazy and planted a seed in Jonesy to be oh yeah, it was all you. You did it. You're fucked up. And it was not. And Mr. Gray really did have some power and was able to, infect him in some way. Because Jonesy's immune to the virus. But Jonesy inhales it. And I would think if Jonesy was immune to the virus to some extent, that would mean it just can't infect him and get all up in him. Because Pete gets crazy infected, and that ends up being his undoing, is because he's so infected it gets everywhere. And Mr. Gray can control it, and it's the end of Pete. But with Jonesy, if he inhaled it and, was able to bring Mr. Gray onto the Dreamcatcher with them, if you read this, you know what that means. But he was able to bring him onto the Dreamcatcher with him. It would make sense that Mr. Gray could then kind of infect some of the areas and not necessarily permanently infect him. It just means he was able to kind of utilize all that power that Duddits had given him and Jonesy had just naturally. So that's my theory. But anyways, I think Dreamcatcher is a good read if you like aliens, if you like that scary aspect, and you really like gore. I think this is a great book. I do like this more than the movie. I think the movie is still good, but I don't think the movie holds up very well to the book because there's just so much more information and there's just so many more little things about everybody that you can't cram into a movie. So I enjoy this. If you're going to watch the movie first, then read the book. I think that would be the best way to enjoy them both and kind of compare and contrast. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me rant.